Clutching the parchment in trembling fingers, I read once more the urgent letter bearing my great-aunt's shaky signature. She had never been one to pen more than a few words at a time, so the note's length was concerning in itself. It recounted an old family legend involving hidden jewels in the mausoleum on the estate. My aunt's frantic handwriting swirled into dire warnings, urging me to stay away from the crypt and never to pry open the stone chamber's sealed compartment. Yet her pleas had the opposite effect on me. There is a strange pull that fear exerts, an undeniable curiosity that compels one to confront the unknown. As the train pulled into the isolated station, I found myself caught between her ominous advice and a mounting desire to discover what truly lay behind these whispered secrets. My lineage had never been discussed openly, and the little I knew enticed me all the more. When I arrived at the estate, the towering wrought iron gates were unlocked, sighing on their hinges when I nudged them open. The path to the main house was overgrown, weeds sprouting through cracks in the gravel. Shadows from ancient oaks seemed to stretch, sentient and watchful, across the deserted grounds as I made my way to the front steps of the mansion. Dust caked the windows, and the fading facade bore the scars of neglect. Once, my family was said to possess unimaginable wealth, made evident by the grand architecture and opulent interior design, but now the place seemed to exist in its own lonely kingdom of sullen hush, as if waiting for the next tragic chapter of its story to unfold. Inside, the hallway was silent except for the tap-tap of my footsteps on the marble floor. Cobwebs clung to corners, and the faint smell of mildew lingered in every corridor. Several portraits hung along the walls, the eyes of my long-deceased ancestors appearing to follow me as I carefully navigated the labyrinth. I traced my hand along a carved banister, feeling the grain of the dark wood, imagining all those who had ascended and descended these steps before. A sense of foreboding weighed on me, as if the house itself was sizing me up, deciding whether to welcome or devour me. My aunt was nowhere to be found. In fact, there was no sign that anyone had lived here for months. I roamed the drawing rooms, the library, even the scullery, but found only silence. On the dusty marble mantel of the main drawing room lay an archaic key tied with a red ribbon. Beside it was a handwritten note in the same spindly penmanship as the letter. "Guard yourself. The mausoleum never sleeps." My heart thundered. This key, it seemed, was meant for me. I picked it up, feeling its cold weight in my palm, and sensed something older than time resonating through the metal. That night, a restless apprehension kept me awake, the thought of the mausoleum thick in my mind like a stubborn dream. Rain lashed the windows, and soft thunder rumbled across the turrets and chimneys of the aging mansion. My bedchamber was modest, compared to the grandeur of the rest of the house, but the swaying shadows cast by the storm's lightning made every piece of furniture look menacing. The wind seemed to moan through the corridors, occasionally mimicking a distant cry. More than once, I thought I heard footsteps approaching my door, only to find nothing there when I moved to check. In a moment of uneasy sleep, I dreamed of an echoing subterranean chamber. I stood amid dark crypts, glimmering jewels hanging in the air like shards of starlight. Ghostly silhouettes hovered around them, transfixed in eternal servitude. The vision felt so visceral that my pulse quickened. Then I awoke to the scratching of tree branches against the pane. Drenched in sweat, I forced myself to steady my breathing. My aunt's words rang in my ears, to resist the call of the crypt, and yet every fiber of my being felt drawn to it, as if some ancient magnet beneath the earth were tugging at my soul. I rose before the pale sun broke through the horizon. With a heavy key in hand, I ventured outside. The storm's remnants lingered in puddles, and a damp chill in the air. The mausoleum stood at the far end of the property, surrounded by a tangle of ivy and locked behind its own ornate gate. Even from a distance, I could see its time-worn facade. A small, domed structure of gray stone, columns chipped and worn by decades of rainfall and neglect. The faint outlines of carved symbols traced its exterior, too weathered to decipher. Graveyard ravens perched on the mausoleum's roof, watching solemnly as I approached the gate and tested the lock. It swung open with minimal effort, the ancient metal creaking in complaint. As I pushed my way through the ivy, I saw a thick iron door at the top of a short flight of steps. A rusted padlock was affixed to a metal ring. My aunt's key fit exactly. There was a sharp metallic click, and the lock fell away. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the damp stillness and gathering the courage to push the door open. When I finally did, the hinges screamed in protest. The darkness beyond yawned like a silent challenge, beckoning me to learn its secrets. Inside, a narrow passage led to a circular chamber. Dust motes swirled in the feeble daylight that followed me in, illuminating rows of niches in the walls. Some contained urns and decaying family heirlooms. Others appeared empty, a shroud of mystery in their silent gloom. In the center of the chamber, a pedestal rose from the floor, carved with swirling motifs that seemed to depict swirling figures and radiant jewels. The stone at its top had a slight indentation, as if something had once rested there. My ears pricked at a faint sound behind me, a soft rustle. Heart hammering, I turned to see a shape retreating into the shadows further down the crypt. It was too swift to discern details, but it moved with an unnatural stillness, its footsteps silent on the stones. I swallowed hard, stepping forward to follow. If that was a person, who were they? An intruder? A caretaker? If it was something else, I hesitated even to finish that thought. The corridor led deeper into the mausoleum, branching off to smaller alcoves. A strange, phosphorescent glow shimmered along the walls, as though the stone itself was somehow luminous. Eventually, I found a large door of dark oak bound by iron. It bore the family crest, a shield encircled by serpentine vines. Pushing it open, I entered an antechamber that contained several stone sarcophagi, their lids carved with the likenesses of ancestors from centuries past. Time and moisture had eroded the faces, leaving them expressionless phantoms. Candle sconces stood at intervals, though their tapers had long since melted into jagged lumps. And there, on a small altar in the center, was a dusty velvet cushion. Resting upon it were 3 pieces of jewelry, an intricate necklace, a pair of earrings, and a teardrop ring, each studded with gemstones that caught the faint light in unnerving ways. They seemed to shimmer of their own accord. I approached cautiously, reminded of my aunt's warning that the mausoleum housed cursed jewelry. The hush of the tomb pressed in on me, and I found myself briefly locked in the gem's radiance. The color in each stone shifted between red, green, and a deep midnight blue, as if alive and swirling with sinister magic. Unable to help myself, I inched closer, hand outstretched. My fingertips brushed the ring, sending a chill through my entire body. In that instant, a voice hissed. Was it in my mind, or did it echo through the crypt? Wear it and be bound. I jerked my hand back, breath catching in my throat. The voice sounded as if it belonged to something ancient, coiled in the darkness. A frantic desire to flee seized me, but curiosity once again held me in place. My lineage was entangled with these strange talismans. I was certain of it. Which ancestors had borne them? What kind of fate had they suffered? Drawing back a step, I noticed the figure that had fled me earlier, lurking behind one of the sarcophagi, half concealed in the gloom. Gathering my nerves, I approached. As I neared, a woman's face emerged. Gaunt, almost translucent skin stretched across bone, eyes shaded with desperation. She wore tattered clothes that looked perhaps decades old. Though she was hauntingly thin, there was a regal bearing to the way she held her chin, as though she had once been proud and powerful. She spoke with a trembling voice. "You must leave here at once. Do not touch the gems." Her words might have sounded less alarming had I not noticed a faint shimmer clinging to her wrists and neck, an echo of the same curses woven into the sparkling stones. I asked her name. For a moment, confusion crossed her eyes, as though the question was foreign to her. Then in a hoarse whisper she said, "Victoria, I was once the mistress of this estate." My mind reeled. Victoria was an ancestor from nearly a century ago, known for her extravagant lifestyle and abrupt disappearance. Rumor held that she had run off to the continent, squandering the family fortune. Yet here she stood in a dark recess of the mausoleum, very much, and yet not quite, alive. I tried to approach her, but she shrank back, pressing herself against the cold stone. "It's too late for me," she murmured, and I touched the ring. I wore it, thinking it was my right. We all believed the stories, that the jewels protected the estate, bestowing fortune and longevity on those who could control them. But it was a monstrous lie. We became slaves to the spirits trapped within. The gems channeled them. Each wearer is consumed, their life force siphoned away, their spirit locked in eternal bondage. It took all my courage not to bolt for the exit right then, but her eyes pleaded for help, or for release. "Is there any way to end this?" I whispered shakily, glancing back at the cursed jewelry on the altar. She opened her mouth to answer, but a jarring moan emerged from the darkness behind her, as though several voices at once were crying out in protest. She flinched, terror contorting her features. "They sense your presence," she warned. "They do not want another to meddle." My mind spun, recalling old family rumors about ancestors who disappeared, fortunes evaporating as cryptic tales circulated. Now it was clear. The labyrinth of wealth and ruin was linked to these wretched trinkets. The voice that had spoken to me when I touched the ring lurked close, suppressed, but never gone. Determined to find answers, I steadied myself, ignoring the tremor in my limbs. I peered back at the ring, the necklace, and the earrings, now glowing with a malevolent invitation. "Victoria," I said quietly, "I'm going to see if I can break this curse. I can't leave you like this." Her eyes widened. Fear mingled with something like hope. "There's a chamber beneath the main altar," she said quickly. "A hidden vault. That's where the origin of the curse is imprisoned. You must find it, but be warned, the path is guarded by twisted spirits, bound to protect their own damnation." Steeling myself, I walked toward the crypt's far wall. My eyes scanned the stone, searching for any sign of a hidden entrance. An odd seam in the corner drew my attention, a narrow crack in the masonry that might have been invisible without close inspection. Pressing my ear to the cold stone, I heard a muffled hum, like distant chanting. With a grim determination, I pushed on the crack. It gave way, revealing a dark stairwell descending into the earth. I plunged into the hidden passage, each step echoing dully against walls that seemed to pulse. A vile stench wafted upward, reminiscent of decaying earth and centuries of stale air. My candle flickered, threatening to abandon me to the darkness. Sweat beaded on my forehead, and my hand shook so badly that droplets of molten wax singed my skin. Undeterred, I pressed on, driven by something stronger than fear, perhaps a craving for resolution, or the weight of my family's ghosts pressing upon my conscience. At the bottom, the corridor opened into a cramped subterranean chamber. A single stone pillar occupied its center, etched with symbols that glowed faintly like heated metal. An ancient tome lay open on a makeshift altar, its pages filled with labyrinthine text and diagrams of jewels. Vials of dried herbs and blackened candles surrounded the book, along with a battered silver chalice whose rim was crusted with something dark. My eyes fell on a single illustration repeated across the pages, the same gems I'd seen on the altar upstairs, each ringed by engravings of chained silhouettes. A wave of dread settled over me. This was no mere legend. It was a deliberate, methodical ritual, designed to bind souls. And my ancestors had guarded it, or perhaps been enslaved by it, for generations. But there had to be a flaw in its design, a way to shatter the chain, I carefully studied the archaic script. Though I could only make out fragments, I recognized references to ritual purification, the destruction of each gem in the presence of certain rites, and a final invocation that could banish the enslaved spirits to whatever plane they belonged. The instructions were incomplete, smudged or eaten away by time, yet a pattern emerged. Break the gem, free the spirit. A hollow moan drifted through the chamber. I spun to see a cluster of faint figures materialize at the edges of my vision. They were more shaped than flesh, each face frozen in silent torment. Eyes shining with sorrow, the ghosts drifted slowly forward, circling the pillar, their forms flickering in and out as though the act of being seen caused them pain. One of them stretched a transparent hand toward me, its mouth moving without sound. I swallowed hard, feeling the power of their despair weigh on me like a chain. I forced myself to speak softly. "I want to help." They paused, faces contorting with a mixture of longing and distrust. The words caught in my throat, but desperation pushed them out. "I'm going to destroy the gems," I said. "You'll be freed." A collective whisper rattled through the gloom. Some of the ghosts backed away as if the idea was too terrifying or too improbable to believe. Others crept closer, their spectral lips trembling with unspoken plea. Gathering my courage, I reached for the chalice. If the text had it right, I needed to use the items in the altar above those cursed jewels to fight the power fueling them. But to do so, I suspected I might have to don at least one of them, risking the same fate that befell Victoria. My mind darted to my aunt's warning, but I steeled myself. A family's torment hung in the balance. If I could salvage their souls, perhaps I could finally break the cycle of corruption that haunted my bloodline. Returning to the main chamber, I felt every tendon in my body strain with the tension of what I was about to do. Victoria hovered near the altar, her eyes hollow with dread. "If you wear the ring, you won't come back," she said, voice trembling. I inhaled a ragged breath. "Perhaps. But if I don't, none of us will ever truly be free." With shaking hands, I lifted the ring from its velvet cushion. Its gemstone radiated an uncanny light, swirling with hidden shadows. The instant it slipped onto my finger, searing pain tore through my nerves, as though molten metal laced up my arm and lodged in my chest. My vision blurred. 1,000 voices exploded in my mind, shrieking, pleading, commanding. I staggered, nearly collapsing. But I forced myself to focus on the steps needed to break the curse. Victoria cried out, her form flickering as though some invisible hand yanked her backward. The voices inside my head hissed, "Surrender!" over and over, a cloying chorus. Laboring for breath, I stumbled back toward the hidden stairwell, ring clenched so tight around my finger I felt the metal cutting into flesh. My surroundings swam in and out of focus, the walls flexing like living tissue. I could sense the immensity of the trapped spirits swirling inside the gem, each one vying for dominance. Their anguish was so profound, so ancient, it nearly buckled my resolve. I clutched the ancient tome, flicking pages with trembling hands, searching for the ritual incantation that would guide me. Kneeling at the stone pillar, I forced the words from my lips, reciting incantations that my ancestors had once sought to hide. The luminous symbols on the pillar flared. The moment I finished, the ring's gemstone glowed with a fierce brilliance. Through half-lidded eyes, I saw the ring's surface begin to crack. My body convulsed with pain, a punishing wave that made my vision speckle black. Still, I pressed on, summoning the final shred of willpower in me to speak the last lines. A thunderous roar reverberated, shaking the chamber violently, as if the very foundation of the mausoleum threatened to collapse. As the gem in the ring splintered, a hideous shriek ripped through the air. Ectoplasmic shapes burst from the fractured stone, some swirling upward, some vanishing in an eruption of smoky light. The ring fell off, molten shards scattering across the floor. Then, without warning, the entire crypt fell silent. I gulped in air, tears stinging my eyes. Something powerful had been severed. I could feel it in my bones. an ancient chain snapping at last. Gasping, I stumbled back up to the main crypt, searching for Victoria. I found her collapsed near one of the stone sarcophagi. She looked more solid, her features less ghostly. Her eyes fluttered open when I called her name, and something like relief crossed her face. "It hurts less," she murmured, "as if I'm waking from a terrible dream." I offered my hand to help her up, and to my astonishment, she felt almost real. I guided her to the altar where the necklace and earring still rested. "We have to destroy the others," I said. She nodded, understanding blazing in her eyes. One by one, we carried the cursed jewels back to the hidden chamber. This time, I performed the ritual around the necklace. It took every ounce of remaining strength, but the outcome was the same. The gemstone fractured with a deafening crack, releasing a swarm of tormented spirits into the ether. The echoes of centuries of captivity resounded in the cramped chamber as they fled. Finally, I turned to the last item, the pair of earrings. Perhaps suspecting the destruction to come, the stones glowed with intense malevolence, almost like living eyes. With trembling hands, we prepared the ritual a final time. A new wave of pain scorched me, but by then I was too determined to let it stop me. I finished the incantation. This thunderous impact of invisible force flung me against the wall, nearly knocking me unconscious. But I saw the earrings shatter in a final brilliance of color, taking with them the last cluster of enslaved spirits. When silence fell once more, I felt as if I weighed nothing. The chains of dread lifted from my chest. I could barely stand, staggering with exhaustion, but I managed to turn to Victoria. She stood beside me, tears glistening in her eyes. Slowly, she began to fade, her form shedding translucent fragments of light. "You've done it," she murmured. "You've freed us. Thank you." Her last words trailed off as she vanished, leaving only a faint echo of gratitude. For a moment I stood there, heart pounding, wondering if she and the others had truly found peace. The mausoleum above felt different when I emerged, each corridor and alcove somehow lighter, as though a centuries-old gloom had been exorcised. The once menacing hush had mellowed into solemn tranquility. Though I was still shaken in body and soul, I felt a sense of victory in my heart. For those whose lives or afterlives had been bound in torment, stumbling into the daylight, I inhaled fresh air as if it were a rare commodity. Soft sunlight touched the weathered facade of the mausoleum, casting it in gentle relief. The ravens perched on its roof cawed, though their harsh voices seemed less ominous now, more like a call back to the living world. Back in the mansion, I found scattered evidence of my aunt's final days. In her journal, she had recorded cryptic clues about the curse and her futile attempts to ward others away. Her last entry spoke of me, how she hoped I might be strong enough to break the cycle. The pages ended abruptly, as though something had carried her off in the night. Yet I kept searching, eventually discovering a modest bedroom behind a hidden door in the west wing, where I found her lying peacefully in bed, eyes closed. She was no more than a husk. Her spirit, I suspected, had remained tethered to the crypt's clutches. With trembling hands, I covered her with a blanket and bowed my head in silent farewell, praying that she was among those now freed. A day later, as dusk fell, I walked the estate's corridors with a candle in hand, to check that no lingering shadows lurked. To my surprise, none seemed to remain. The air felt lighter, and even the wind that whispered through the corridors seemed harmonious rather than chilling. In the drawing room, I looked out at the neglected gardens. I could almost see them bursting back to life under kinder stewardship. With the crypt's curse lifted, perhaps the estate could finally heal. Sleep that night was blissful, uninterrupted by nightmares or strange moans. At dawn, I rose and headed for the train station, leaving a note in the mansion's foyer for any future caretaker. I wanted them to know what had transpired. The jewels shattered, the enchantment broken, the souls released. As I passed through the estate gates, I turned and cast one final glance at the mausoleum's silent dome rising beyond the tree line. A gentle breeze stirred the ivy, rustling the leaves as though in nodding farewell. Though the estate still carried long scars of its troubled history, I felt an odd assurance that its darkest chapter had come to a close. The riddle of my family's vanished ancestors, the hushed tales of cursed wealth, all found resolution in the shattered fragments of those once enslaving gems. In their destruction there came a sunrise after a centuries-long night. And in that new light, though shaped by sorrow and sacrifice, I sensed the faint but undeniable promise of redemption for those who had long been trapped under the spell of an accursed legacy.